Hello and welcome back to the World Leader Leaderboard, the show where we rank every politician to let you know who is winning and losing every week. Today I'm joined by Georgina Finley.
Hey.
Zach Michaelis.
Hello.
And Rory Taylor.
Hello.
How are we doing?
Really good.
Yeah,
Nice.
very well.
Feeling calm.
Big weekend.
Oh, of course it was. Yeah, I thought you were asking me personally.
No,
It was like,
was it a big weekend, Zach?
yeah, no, not at all, actually. Pretty chill.
Big weekend globally, though. Munich Security Conference.
Yeah, it was actually massive. We weren't invited this year.
We weren't invited this year.
Great.
If we were, things would have gone differently.
I think we could have calmed
Yeah.
the ship. Yeah, I do. I really do. But there's a lot to talk about. There's a lot of movement on the geopolitical stage and on our leaderboard, of course. On screen now is how the leaderboard stands as we are at the beginning of the episode. And each of our panel get the opportunity to move one person up and one person down. And we will also be moving someone based on your suggestions. But as always, let's start with our winners of the week. And Zach, let's start with you. Who's your winner this week?
My winner of the week is going to be French President Emmanuel Macron. As long-time viewers will know, I always want to put Macron up, but this time I think he really deserves it. And I think the main reason is just that he's been proven right. You know, Macron has spent the past, must be like sort of 7-8 years now, telling the rest of Europe that you can't really trust the Americans and that NATO is not as reliable as many people assume. And well, at the time we're recording this on Monday, and European leaders are in Paris to talk about what Antonio Costa, the EU Council President, has described as a new European security architecture. And Macron's basic contention that Europe needs to take its sort of security and strategic considerations more seriously and develop an independent policy on both those fronts has just been borne out by events. But I also, the other thing that Macron has actually been proven right about is that on economic issues as well, Europe has always been complacent. And Macron hasn't just pushed for Europe to take a more sort of independent security policy, but also to take its economic stagnation more seriously. And that's mainly sort of manifest in calls for a more integrated single market. But stuff that sounds boring, like capital markets union or joint borrowing, that everyone was sort of like waving away, 5-6 years ago, there's now a consensus that that's exactly what Europe needs. And so Macron has been proven right, both on his sort of foreign policy position and sort of general sort of NATO skepticism, but also on his sense that Europe needs to sort of be kicked out of its complacency.
So big validation from Macron and arguably for Zach too, as the UK's biggest Macron stan. What do the rest of the panel think? Macron moving up this week towards the top of the board, only one spot away from the top. What do you make of this?
Yeah, I think at one point he was pretty low down on the board, so he's had a pretty impressive rise from that position.
Yeah,
this seems like a very fair one. I think the big question remains, even though he has been proven right on this issue, can he convince Europe to actually sort of get itself together and make the changes that it needs to make? This summit today is obviously the big sort of first moment in that. It's a very classic Macron thing to do. He loves to call a summit and host people in Paris for big things like this. So it's sort of vintage Macron. But yeah, I think he's had a good week, definitely.
That is kind of the question I wanted to pose to Zach, so I'm going to push that towards you, Zach. That like he has maybe won the argument from like a strategic perspective or a political perspective maybe, but do you think he'll actually win the argument when it comes to convincing action? Do you think that Europe actually agrees with him enough that they actually will agree to do something, or is this a case of like, well, he's been proved theoretically correct, the Americans aren't that reliable, but Europe still doesn't have the wherewithal to do something about it?
I mean, you're right. And this does point to the big issue for Macron is that there's actually no political reward for being right. I mean, that's just sort of a famous...
Besides on the leaderboard, obviously.
Yeah, there's a famous truism in politics is that in lots of cases, the worst mistake you can make is to be right too early. Yeah, I mean, who knows? No one really knows what's going to come out of the summit. I would say that I think that in certain cases, I don't think we should expect something dramatic to happen in the next sort of 24 hours or so.
Let's hope not, because it's being recorded 2 days in advance. So
yeah, I know, it'd be quite frustrating. But I think what you're more likely to see is that what look like quite small, gradual steps that Macron can get the EU to take will eventually translate into some more dramatic reform, probably after Macron's time is done. So I do think like the best example of this, and I don't know what the security analogy would be, it would be the joint borrowing that happened during the pandemic, which is something that Macron had been pushing for really quite a long time. And it eventually happened, and he did get Merkel to agree to it. And there's this massive joint borrowing thing. And they're now going to have to pay that off in 2028. That's about sort of 300 billion euros has been borrowed and spent via what's called the RRF, which is that facility they use to borrow on the international markets. And that will force deeper integration. We made that argument in a video a couple of days ago, but the EU has to come up with some sort of way to pay that off, and it will probably require deeper fiscal union of some sort or another. And maybe there's something similar will happen with defense. Macron and Kaja Kallas, who's basically the EU's foreign policy chief now, formerly the PM of Estonia, have been pushing for more joint borrowing to fund a sort of new European defense initiative, not like a European army quite, but sort of more joint procurement. And if that happens, again, that would be a step in that same direction. So I don't think we should expect Tuesday morning, Macron announces a new European army and he's the sort of commander in chief. He's going to, lead us into battle, although I would follow. I think we should expect something that, is not necessarily so headline grabbing, but will sort of encourage the EU towards that sort of ever closer union that I think he wants. Yeah.
Okay, so we will see what happens over the next few days in Paris. It'll be interesting what emerges, what the aftermath of Munich is, of JD Vance's comments, and how Europe kind of responds to all of this, and obviously any progress between Russia and Ukraine. But for the moment, Macron moves up towards the top section of the board. Next, let's move down to you, Georgina. Who is your winner this week?
My winner this week is Russian President Vladimir Putin. This is another case of a world leader moving up on the board, not necessarily through something they've done themselves, but more as a symptom of the broader geopolitical environment. And this comes off the back of a week in which the Trump administration in the US has made various statements or decisions which play right into Putin's hands and effectively validate his war aims with the war in Ukraine, in that Trump's Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has said that, considering a return to the pre-2014 borders of Ukraine is, unreasonable or unlikely, effectively, granting Putin permission to take sovereign territory of another country. And also Tulsi Gabbard, who's quite sympathetic to Russia, has been confirmed as the US's intelligence chief. And Trump's administration has also ruled out NATO membership for Ukraine. And alongside this, Europe is kind of in chaos with this Ukraine situation now, which is what we're seeing play out at the Munich Security Conference. Things are moving so quickly on this front as well that we don't know by the time this podcast comes out whether there'll be a whole new development. But tomorrow, so Tuesday this week, the US is meeting with Russia directly in Saudi Arabia on the issue of Ukraine, and has excluded European delegates or European presence at that meeting, which is causing a lot of chaos in Europe. But all of this effectively is playing right into what Putin wants to be happening at the moment. There's a lot of jubilance from reports, in Moscow at the moment. One report I read saying that it's like New Year's, Christmas and Easter all rolled into one from Moscow. So I think it's hard to argue that Putin's had a bad week, given what we've heard about Ukraine.
Okay, so Putin moving up, back towards the middle again, kind of moving on to a more popular section of the board. What do we make of that, Rory, Zach?
Yeah, he's in just the past few weeks and months, he's gone from being a complete international pariah to suddenly being like, Trump talking about visiting Moscow or Putin visiting Washington and having these direct talks with the US. It's such a different situation than we were like just a few months ago. On the things that Georgina raised, like the various pronouncements that various US officials said, like Ukraine probably won't join NATO or won't get its pre-2014 borders back. Those are things that might have been the outcome of negotiations. Yeah. But to say those things up front before even having the negotiations is quite a big giveaway, I think. But I also think there's quite a, I think it's been, hasn't been spoken about as much, but so far Trump's attitude or Trump's approach to Ukraine hasn't just been. It's not that it's been pro-Russia, anti-Ukraine. It's sort of been that there hasn't been much coherence to it.
Yeah.
Because a lot of those statements that came out from people like Pete Hegseth and I think some of the advisors and stuff, they would say things, and the White House would slightly walk it back, and they'd be slightly contradicting things from other parts of the administration, and it just shows there's a slight, quite a significant amount of uncertainty within the administration about what its actual position is. When you've got people, you've got the thing where Trump will say something, then other officials will have to try and justify it or explain it. Or if they say something, then they don't know that within 24 hours Trump might contradict them. It's not a very good position to be in if you're going into quite important negotiations.
Yeah.
But I think that also introduces a degree of uncertainty for Putin.
Yeah, that's true.
Right, in that it sounds like a good thing for him because he's kicking off negotiations, and it looks like the US have accepted some of his more out there demands. But I think that, it's probably too early. I mean, annoyingly, this will be released on Wednesday. I'm recording it on Monday, and the talks happen on Tuesday. So this could all look very, very silly. But at least at time of recording, it's definitely an open question, like what the outcome of the negotiations are. There's a real anxiety in Europe that Trump and Putin will come out of those negotiations, and Trump will say, Putin can have those 4 oblasts. Ukraine's never joining NATO. It's up to the Europeans to sort out security. We're leaving, and all the sanctions are lifted as well.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I think that actually Putin clearly wants a lot, and I think if you sort of take the median statement from the White House, I think it sounds like Trump is more offering him a draw. And I think Putin wants a victory. If you froze the front lines, for instance, along the current lines of control, and those were the new borders, that would fall well short of what Putin says he wants, right?
Yeah.
And that's sort of the minimal of what he says he wants. He wants those 4 oblasts. He wants Kherson and Zaporizhia, and then Luhansk and Donetsk, and he doesn't control all of them. He only controls, I think, all of Luhansk and most of Donetsk, but then about half of Zaporizhia, half of Kherson. And he's constitutionally said that those are all part of Russia. So unless Trump goes, okay, fine, you can have territory you literally don't control, is that going to be enough for Putin?
Yeah.
And then a lot more depends on sort of what precisely the sort of sanctions relaxation looks like, because the Americans might decide that why would we relax sanctions? It gives us leverage to, in the future. And equally, originally when sort of some Republicans were talking about Ukraine and NATO. Originally, it wasn't that Ukraine would never join NATO. It was more that it wouldn't join for 25 years or something like that, which might not be sort of ideal from Putin's perspective. But I do think that there is my sort of vague sense of it at the moment. And again, this might look very, very silly on Wednesday, is that Trump is offering him a draw. That's what he sees. And Putin still wants a victory. And so I don't think a negotiated settlement, I don't actually think we should expect one on Tuesday. Again, I might feel very, very silly by the time this comes out, but I don't think we should expect one on Tuesday. I think there's still too much ground between those two.
I'm not sure if were you arguing that therefore Putin isn't a winner because he wants a victory?
He's definitely a winner compared to in the past week has definitely been, I think, good for him in certain senses.
I also agree with what you said in that
I wasn't
Trump's offered concessions, right, but not what Putin wants.
Yeah, exactly.
But, the way that European officials are seeing it now, which is why this is causing so much fear and anxiety, is that it's the kind of logic where if you grant someone an inch, then they'll take a mile or whatever.
No, I'm agreeing. It's definitely been a good week for Putin, especially given that, and as we've covered on the other channels, there was a moment where Trump looked like he'd be really quite pro-Ukraine. It looked like Zelensky had sort of convinced him, and he was talking, blaming Putin for stalling negotiations and threatening further sanctions. And the fact that, in the past week, the tone has definitely changed. I mean, that's hard to deny. Again, it's how much, with Trump, though, with all these things, how much to infer substantially from a change in rhetoric. But anyway, I agree. It's definitely been a good week for him. I'm just saying, I think there is a sort of like fatalism in certain corners of Europe that we're going to wake up on Wednesday morning and Putin and Trump will have carved up Ukraine, and the lesson for autocrats everywhere will be like, invade who you want. No one cares. You can, if someone's small, it's their fault. You can take their territory.
Yeah.
And I just don't think that's a foregone conclusion yet at this point. I still think there's a fair distance between those two sides, and Putin might not end up getting everything he wants. And in the worst case scenario, Trump feels like Putin was acting in good faith. When they actually sit down to negotiate, Putin goes, oh no, it turns out I want a lot more than I implied I wanted. Yeah. Trump gets very, very grumpy and does what he said he would do a couple of weeks ago. Yeah. Slaps massive sanctions on Russia, sort of escalates against Russia, maybe provides some more support to the Europeans. You know, who knows? I'm just saying there's a degree of ambiguity here, or uncertainty rather, as with all things Trump.
He's certainly heading in a more positive direction, though, which is why he is moving up our board this week. And I imagine we'll be talking about it much more in future weeks, as you say. There's more progress to be made, and both him and Trump could possibly move as a result. Let's close with our last winner of the week. Rory, who are you moving up on
My
the board?
winner of the week is Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India.
New entry.
Yeah, new entry. So this actually covers the last couple of weeks, I think. My main reason for making him a winner of the week is that his party, the BJP, just won a big victory in Delhi, the capital, in the sort of state election there. This is significant for a few reasons. Firstly, they haven't won Delhi for nearly 30 years.
Yeah.
So that's a massive sort of turn of events. It also shows that his party and Modi himself has sort of rebounded from last year, where at the general election in India, his party lost its majority. They're still in government, but in a minority coalition. A coalition that has a majority. And there was this talk that maybe Modi's star power is starting to weaken. Maybe the BJP's electoral machine has started to sort of go past its peak. But this shows that maybe those statements were a little bit too premature and that they have found their footing again. So that's reason one. Reason two for making him a winner is that he had a relatively positive meeting with Trump, I think last week at the White House. They covered a lot of things, but some of the wins for Modi were securing the extradition of a terror suspect from the US. The two sides agreed to boost defense ties, and they're going to continue to talk on trade and tariffs and those kind of things. It wasn't like a massively positively reviewed meeting, but it was just generally positive. So that's my sort of supplementary reason for making him a winner.
Nice. First time Modi appears on the board, which feels 11 weeks in.
Yeah.
He's lasted quite a long time before making a hit, considering a pretty major figure from a very major country. I mean, geopolitically, kind of interestingly, not that relevant to the conversations we have internally, at least. India doesn't come up super regularly. But yeah, obviously a massive country with a lot of influence still.
Well, I think, by the way, it doesn't come out that frequently in part because he's playing his hand quite well.
Yes.
I don't know much about the domestic politics, but when it comes to the foreign policy stuff, you know, he's done quite a good job of balancing basically the two big superpowers, right? China and the US. And alongside some relatively cordial vibes with Trump, he has also, in the past few months or so, sort of toned things down with China. There were some residual tensions, you know, let's say like last year, the year before. People might remember those border skirmishes. They always like start doing the rounds on X because they're not allowed to fight with guns. So it's just people with sticks like whacking shit out of each other. And that seems to have been resolved somewhat. And I think that it looks like Modi's doing a pretty good job of balancing those two superpowers, which has always been the big sort of foreign policy question for India.
Yeah. And what do you make, kind of panel more generally, of what Rory talked about there about the relationship with the US with Trump? Is Trump a good sign for Modi? Is that going to make his life more difficult balancing this power imbalance between the superpowers? Or are they aligned, do we think?
I was intrigued by Rory's second reason, only because I think it was for the Daily Briefing last week. We were writing a story about it, and my impression, this was early on, was that Modi had actually ceded had given concessions to Trump to kind of get him on side before these meetings in terms of the tariff stuff. But I guess like on the other side of it, with Trump, you don't really have any option but to kind of try and get on the right side as you're going into it. So I guess, yeah, considering he came out and there were no massive tariffs on any specific Indian goods, I think, you can probably see that as a win. Yeah.
I think because it didn't come with massive fanfare, this meeting, whereas previous visits by Modi to the sort of Trump-led US have been very dramatic. This was a very sort of like business-focused one. Okay. But I think the good news for Modi is that Trump clearly does like Modi. He clearly respects him and likes him. I think Trump even said something like Modi is a better negotiator than I am, which is, from Trump, that's quite a statement. Wow.
Yeah, the deal.
Yeah. And Zach said an interesting thing about the balancing of the two sides. And yeah, you're welcome. And yeah, Modi is clearly very good at this because India under Modi gets a huge amount of its sort of military equipment from Russia, but at the same time Trump said that he would be willing to sell F-35 fighter jets to India, which is a pretty big thing. I don't think it will happen anytime soon because there's various reasons why it's difficult. But to have those two things, you know, lots of military equipment from Russia, lots of economic ties with China, and having that offer from the US, that shows how we sort of friend, maybe not friends with everyone, but at least sort of vaguely positive acquaintances with enough people that he can get by.
And that is enough to reach the top half of the board. I mean, it sounds like he's doing a pretty good job, to be fair, based on that overall analysis. As Georgina notes, maybe some slight issues with Trump, maybe some concessions there, but he is now on the board and can be moved in future weeks. So it'll be interesting to see where he ends up landing. So those are our winners of the week. Let's move on to the audience suggestion. Okay, so every week we allow the audience to suggest one person who should either be added to the board or be moved on the board, and the panel then have to decide whether that person is moved up or moved down. Today's edition is someone who's already on the board, Anthony Albanese, the Australian Prime Minister, currently sitting just under the middle, kind of just in the lightly bad section. So we have to make a decision now. Are we moving him up to neutral or down to just straight up bad, alongside a colourful array of characters? So let's run down the line. If you can give your up or down and also a brief reason, and then we will see if we have agreement. We'll start with you, Georgina. Albanese, is he a winner or a loser this week?
A loser,
Sure.
I think, because his approval rating has plummeted to, I think, the lowest it's been. And Australia has their federal election coming up in, is it May?
So,
May? Yeah. So it's not looking good.
It's not a good time to have your record bad approval ratings, I suppose. Zach, winner or loser?
Yes, he's also a loser for me. Very, very similar reasons. It's not his personal approval ratings, but his party ratings have dropped markedly. Two-party head-to-head polling between his Labour Party and the sort of more centre-right coalition, or to the right of him, coalition party suggests that he used to have about a 5 to 10 point lead on them, and now it is neck and neck, if not a slight coalition lead. There seems to be quite a lot of analogies, by the way, here with what's happening in Canada. And one of the big issues does seem to be housing, where a sort of incumbent left-leaning government has failed to do enough on that issue, and that's provided electoral fuel to their sort of right-wing alternative.
Rory?
Yeah, I'll move him down as well. Don't have much more to add to that.
No.
Polling, if you're, bad polling with a couple of months before an election, there's no other direction you can go, really.
It's true, isn't it? So Anthony Albanese is moving down to the bad section of the board.
Along with Ayatollah Khomeini, Rachel Reeves, Nicholas Maduro.
Putin.
Putin was on that tier, but has since moved up.
Poor Rachel Reeves.
That is a really interesting rung.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
Imagine that was your cabinet. What would your politics be?
Let us know in the comments. Also in the comments, let us know who you want to see moved next week. You can suggest whoever you want in your comment, and also pay attention to everyone else's comments and upvote the people who you want to see moved. And whoever is the top one within reason next week will be either added or moved on the board. Before we move to our losers of the week, a quick shout out to our magazine, Too Long, which we're making real progress on the next issue of. In fact, exclusively for the podcast, here is some B-roll of a preview copy we received. Whoa! Oh my God, it's coming in live. This is crazy.
On cue.
This literally, none of us have seen this yet.
That's the new one.
Yeah.
Oh,
This is actually
a genuine reaction. For once.
It's the next issue of Too Long 4, which is about the world's most influential person. I've got to be careful showing the inside. Here is a double page of Trump looking
Influential.
because I can show you that he is number one. Here's some more Trump. Here's the Trump section. But other than that, I can't show you any other pages because there's a lot of pages with people and numbers and stuff, and that's quite spoilerific. But there's a section on the UK and how Starmer is doing, whether he'll be a one-party leader. We've got a whole section on Europe's New Right, which Georgina wrote. Do you want to give us a little bit of a preview on what Europe's New Right contains?
It contains a breakdown, a dissection, if you will, of the various ideologies on the right of Europe.
Thank you so much. Compelling sales
That hasn't convinced you. I don't know what will.
We also have this funny photo of the South Korean leader smash.
How did you smash him like that?
Just smashing. It's just editing.
That's really
Thank
that's
you.
cool though.
That's what happens when you're down at the bottom of the leaderboard.
It's what happens.
Yeah.
But yeah, this latest copy of the magazine contains a whole bunch of stuff, including obviously our top 25 most influential people as ranked by you and the TLDR team. So if you want to check it all out, if you want to buy a copy, you can pre-order it now on the Too Long store. And if you pre-order a subscription, you save 25% off every copy for as long as you stay subscribed. If you then use code 2podcast at checkout, you get an additional £2 off, which brings the price down to, I don't even know what. Scarlett will put it on screen, but it's disastrously cheap, ruinously cheap. So if you want to grab all of that, then the link is in the description. We'd really appreciate it. But this is really exciting, and I actually want to have a look at this in a minute.
Yeah.
Okay, before we do that though, let's discuss our losers of the week. Okay, Zach, let's jump back over to you. Your loser of the week is...
My loser of the week is Argentina's president Javier Milei,
Oh.
who he is on the board. He's a slight winner at the moment, and I think most weeks you would assume he'd be going up. He's a very, very popular politician, especially given quite how radical his politics are. However, and this is a massive story in Argentina that I think is slowly hitting the international headlines. Maybe by the time this is out, it'll be sort of more well known. But over the weekend, he took to Twitter, or X rather, to promote what is essentially a meme coin, which had the title. It was called Libra, basically, and that sort of inspired tens of thousands of his supporters to invest loads of money in this coin. The value skyrocketed, and then a few hours later, insiders, basically people who had already sort of been allocated the coins before it was sort of publicly available, or very, very early on, suddenly sold all of their coins, absolutely crashing the value of the token. And yeah, they all made loads of money. They made something like $100 million collectively. But obviously, if you were one of Milei's supporters who cashed in, you would have lost all of your money. This has been a massive story in Argentina. I mean, Milei has said that he didn't actually understand what the coin was, but that's not a great look for the president / a renowned economist.
Yeah.
And the opposition is currently talking about impeaching him, or if they can't do that because it requires a 2/3 majority in Congress, at least revoking this thing called Decree 70, which gives him these sort of sweeping executive discretionary powers.
Yeah.
And I think it will do damage to his sort of poll ratings, and that's especially badly timed, given that the midterms are coming up in October.
Yeah.
And Milei would have seen that as his chance to basically improve his congressional representation. His party at the moment doesn't really have many seats in Congress. And that would have made his life just way easier legislatively. It would have made him way easier to actually push through his reforms as he originally intends them, without having to make revisions or concessions to the opposition. So yeah, I think pretty crazy story.
So he endorsed this coin, but do we know if he profited from it, or is it that not clear?
So it looks like he didn't.
Okay. He was just a confused little guy.
Apparently so.
It's almost the worst.
Yeah, it's almost
possible
worse.
It does. I mean, it is bad, but it also does mean that it's less likely that he broke the law.
Sure.
Because
Yes,
there is a specific law saying that people holding public office can't basically fraudulently not make
Manipulate
lots of money.
markets.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So yeah, no, I think pretty terrible.
Pretty
for him.
rough.
Yeah, pretty crazy
Crazy
story.
story.
Yeah, I mean, there were sort of very obvious comparisons with the Trump and Melania meme coins, and there's currently some news that the guys who organized Milei's Libra coin were also behind the Melania coin.
Oh.
Although I do think there was a difference between the Trump one and the Libra one, in that the Trump one, I think plurality of the coins were owned by like insiders in the first place, but they couldn't sell them immediately, which meant there wasn't as much of a chance of what's known as a rug pull, that they couldn't crash the value immediately after it had been pumped. But yeah, so, either way, I mean, just crazy that presidents are into meme coins.
Yeah.
If you told me that 5 years ago, I would have just, or even,
You wouldn't have understood what you meant.
What are we
if I
talking
told
about?
you presidents
Yeah.
into meme coins,
Yeah.
you wouldn't know what
I
that
still don't
sentence
know
meant.
what a meme coin is.
well, the
Can you
meme
give us a
coin is a
quick
slightly
explainer?
pejorative term. I don't know whether I'm using the term meme coin. I don't want to get too into this because I think it's not really our bread and butter. But the guy who actually was responsible for the launch, this is a funny sort of side story, but he's one of Milei's advisors. He's like an American 20-something-year-old, and he sort of did an interview with another YouTuber. I can't remember, CoffeeZilla, something like that. Yeah. Where it's an hour-long interview, and meme coin is basically a word for a cryptocurrency that's just doesn't have a serious use case, and it's just sort of like Doge. It's just like associated with a meme, and it's power and value, whatever.
And also, I think there is a difference there between like its usefulness. Like a regular crypto is like some use case or like has some value beyond just its hype, whereas I think a meme coin is purely just hype rather than anything else. Why are there 1,000 children running past our window? So yeah, Milei is obviously being wrapped up in this, bringing him down from the lightly positive spot. As you say, he's done surprisingly well considering everything he's actually doing in the real world. He is doing pretty well and he's got a lot of fans, even internationally. But he is moving from the lightly positive to the neutral section, a pretty underused section of the board of people who are just doing a mixture of things, good and bad. And unless he's impeached, I guess, then that's pretty bad. But we will see. Future weeks if this ends up kind of rolling on and kind of dragging him down. But for the moment, he's in the middle of the board. Georgina, who are you moving down this week?
My loser this week is German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. So he slips down to join the dream dinner party lineup on the bottom half. And this is because we are a matter of days away from the German federal election taking place on the 23rd of February. And the last poll done by Infratest DMAP, the big German polling company, shows Scholz's SPD on just 14%, which is 1 point lower than it was in the previous poll. And so his party's currently set to finish third after both the AfD, which is currently polling at 21%, and the CDU-CSU polling at 32%. So it's not looking good for Scholz going into the election, and yet he's still saying that I will be chancellor. I'm going to do it.
Manifestation.
So we'll see. Maybe we'll be proven wrong, but it's also the fact that this polling company also asked people whether they thought the heads of the respective parties would be a good chancellor or not, and Scholz had a 26% approval rating, which when you compare to before the 2021 federal election, he had 51%.
Wow.
Thought he would be a good chancellor. So he's lost more than half of his approval, I guess, since before the last election. So yeah, obviously German election, one to watch at the weekend, but probably not going to be a good one for Scholz.
Probably not great. What do we make of this? I mean, it's pretty cut and dry, right? The polling, I mean, as I say, doesn't lie. Good, but generally I think it's unlikely he's going to be chancellor despite his desperate manifestation. What do we make of this move? What do we make of Chancellor Scholz's last weeks in power?
Yeah, unless he somehow doubles his party's polling, I don't think he's going to be chancellor. Yeah, I mean, talking of polling, there was a poll I saw last week that showed the support for the different parties among the youngest group of voters, 18 to 29-year-olds. Yeah. And the SPD's support had collapsed since 2021 into the single digits, which is really bad.
With young people moving to
a range of parties, the Left Party, Greens, and the AfD as well, all fairly high. So sort of in all directions, which suggests that the SPD hasn't really found its place. I also think going forwards after the election, they're going to be in a difficult position. If we just assume that there'll be some kind of like CDU-led coalition with the SPD in it, maybe the Greens, I think they're going to struggle because that's going to be a government that's further to the right than the current government, and supporters of the SPD aren't going to like that the SPD are in that government. Yeah, I think we can already see on the left there's a slight resurgence in the Left Party. I made a video about it if people want to watch it. So there is a force.
Go on, Rory.
So there is a growing force that is sort of drawing in people, sort of unimpressed or unhappy voters from the pool of voters that might support the SPD or Greens. I think. So basically, this pre-election period is bad news for him, but I also think it might not get better after the election.
Interesting. I can definitely see that. That would make sense.
Another thing to watch in the election results on Sunday is keeping an eye on the BSW, this new party, far left party set up by a former member of Die Linke, the left party that Rory's talking about. Because when they first formed, in the first 9 months after, so in the run-up to the European Parliament elections in June, their polling soared basically from nothing, because they were not established until I think it was January 2024, to about 9% they were polling at in the European Parliament elections. But for the federal election, their score is only, in this most recent poll, only 4.5%. So currently not even on track to hit the threshold for parliamentary seats. So that'll be a good one to watch, whether they will broach that 5% threshold or not. Yeah,
I was just going to say, I think that is actually probably the most important element of the German election, because there are like 3 or 4 parties that are all hovering around that 5% threshold.
Yes.
You have the BSW, you have Left, you have the FDP, who are obviously in the existing coalition. And whether or not basically a 2-party grand coalition between the SPD and the CDU is viable depends on how many of those parties make it above the 5% threshold. Because, if they do, that means that the parliamentary representation will just that much more dispersed and that much more diffuse.
And you'll need a bigger coalition.
Yeah, you're probably in 3
as
parties.
As we've seen, that goes very well.
The last thing I just want to say, I think it is it would be so interesting to see how well grand coalition politics works in Germany this time around. Grand coalitions were pretty popular in the Merkel era.
Yeah.
They're a relatively new phenomenon in Germany. I think the first one happens in the 90s. We talked about this a while ago.
Yeah,
and then
late 90s possibly.
The Gerhard, is that Schroeder or before Schroeder? Anyway, I think it's before Schroeder because he has a green coalition. But then, they are surprisingly successful and surprisingly popular. I mean, Merkel is the most obvious case. And that's what Scholz sort of kickstarted his political career. He was her finance minister for a bit. Probably a better finance minister than chancellor, to be fair. But I think that whether or not that's still true, I mean, grand coalitions across the rest of Europe have struggled to deal with the rise of anti-establishment parties, but whether or not the German one can hold it off, I think is really interesting.
The other final thing to mention on this, I think, is that I think, if I'm right, the past few weeks, Friedrich Merz, the leader of the CDU and probably Germany's next chancellor, had left open slightly the possibility of potentially forming a coalition with the AfD.
Yeah.
He's now, since this past weekend, come out and formally said in a 4-way televised debate that he wouldn't accept a coalition with the AfD. And
he performed very well in that debate.
Did he?
Yeah,
I haven't watched
lots
it.
of post-debate polling basically saying that Merz was by far and away the best candidate.
Interesting.
He can come off as a bit tetchy and a bit snappy, but he did really, really well.
Is Merz on the board yet?
He's not.
He's not.
Is he not? Well,
and neither is the AfD's leader. So my question
right.
for the panel, one last thing before we move on from German politics, is if we assume that next week whoever wins the whoever gets the biggest vote share is going to be added as the winner of the week, is that going to be the CDU or is that going to be the AfD with the most votes?
It'll be the CDU.
It'll be, Merz will be hopping up.
Can I ask one more question to everyone?
green.
Yeah.
Do we think Merz has played his hand well with the AfD? Do you know what I mean?
I mean, there was a whole debacle with the migration vote a few weeks ago, which sort of went pretty poorly for him. So I think that went poorly, but then I haven't watched the debate.
All I was saying is the consensus isn't like establishment, sort of like, I don't use this phrase, but like the media bubble is that he's flirted too much with the AfD. But that polling you just mentioned is pretty impressive. It's pretty conclusive. I mean,
I don't think I agree with the media babble. Not to hate on the media babble, but I don't know. Yeah, I kind of agree. I don't think he necessarily has flirted too much or endorsed or whatever.
I think just enough to keep some right-wing voters on side.
I think so. I mean, I'd also recommend people to check out the videos that I wrote on the AfD's manifesto and the CDU manifesto, because even reading those and going through them in great detail became very clear to me how eminently sensible the CDU's manifesto was in comparison to the AfD's.
Sure.
And I think no matter how much people might say, oh yeah, but they've tacked to the right on migration, or they've tacked to the right on, well, that's basically the main AfD kind of area. I think when you look at the actual manifesto, it's nothing like the AfD's.
That's interesting.
Okay, let's move to Rory's loser of the week. Rory.
My loser of the week is Cyril Ramaphosa, the South African president. Again, a few reasons, but the main one is that his government of national unity, which he runs with a range of parties, but the main partner is the sort of centre-right Democratic Alliance. There's more tensions within that coalition. It's been in power for maybe 8 months or 9 months now. And there's been these sort of persistent tensions with different issues coming up. Most recently, there's been reports that the ANC are considering raising taxes, and the Democratic Alliance, the DA, have said they oppose that in any form. The biggest sort of intra-coalition dispute at the moment is over the land expropriation law, which would allow the government to expropriate land without compensation in certain circumstances. That's actually going to court because the DA have filed that as a lawsuit against it. So you've got the government effectively sort of fighting itself in court. Yeah. So there's these tensions, although interestingly, there's been nothing to suggest that the government will collapse, even though there's lots of things they disagree on. I haven't seen anyone suggest that might be a sort of realistic outcome. So that's a positive news for him.
Okay.
But the bigger negative news, I think, is that the Trump administration, both Donald Trump and Elon Musk, have really focused on South Africa.
Yes.
And I think that is a bad sign for any country, especially one that does get quite a lot of funding from abroad. The US cutting off its aid funding is going to have really significant impacts on South Africa, especially HIV treatment, which is a massive issue in South Africa. The US is also boycotting the G20, which is due to take place in South Africa later this month. I think Marco Rubio said he's boycotting it because they're promoting solidarity, equality, and sustainability, I think, which are three things he is deeply opposed to. So yeah, I think one of the best outcomes for a number of countries in the new Trump world is to sort of fly under the radar, whereas they've really taken the full force of the Trump anger. And I think a lot of that is probably because of Elon Musk and his South African roots.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But yeah, so I think that's bad news for Ramaphosa.
What do we make of this? Cyril Ramaphosa moving down to the middle of the board, moving from the lightly positive.
Yeah, I think we've always made a very compelling case. The only thing I'd say is I just do think we can't understate quite how bad the optics are from sort of like what we might call the global south perspective of Trump and Musk having a go at Ramaphosa and defending the interests of white South Africans, leaving aside the specifics. I just think that the optics there are very, very bad, especially because Trump is actually surprisingly popular in lots of global south countries, but his sort of like neo-imperial overtures, places like Greenland, past sort of this line, I don't think is going to endear him to many global south leaders.
Okay, so let's now move on to the final section of the show, our ultimate winners and losers of the week. Okay, so here's how this is going to work. We're going to choose who we think our ultimate winners and losers are of the week. And if we get unanimity on the panel, then that person will move up again or down again to kind of double their impact on the board. But because we originally said that the double movement would only be the first 10 weeks, we've extended it beyond that now indefinitely. This is the 11th episode, if you didn't know. We made it through the first 10. But to make it slightly harder, I am also being added onto the board panel. So you need 4 people in agreement.
For a second, I thought
You are
I thought
being
you meant
added
Jack
onto the
Kelly
board.
was
As in,
on.
I am voting. I'm being added to the panel.
Jack Kelly.
So you have to. The person has to have also convinced me. I am not being added to the World Leaderboard, though. You can if you want, if the audience suggests it.
Don't suggest it.
Don't suggest it. Okay, so we need complete agreement in order for the person to move again. So your options for the biggest winner of the week are Emmanuel Macron, Vladimir Putin, Narendra Modi. Write it on your board, no conferring, and then we will discuss.
Are we just writing the winner?
You are just writing the winner. Okay. Georgina, let's start with you. Who's your ultimate winner of the week and why?
Are we going one by one?
Yes.
My ultimate winner is Vladimir Putin. Because the events of the past week benefited him the best.
Yeah, fine.
He's the winner because he's the winner.
I know I'm going to ruin this. I think everyone else is going to pick Putin. But again, I think there's some uncertainty with the Putin one. And I just think Manu's the best. So that's that.
Rory?
Yeah, I've gone for Vladimir Putin. Same justification as Georgina. I accept the sort of uncertainty, but I think the upending of the transatlantic alliance is just, he's going to be loving that.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
I also didn't vote Putin because I also just worry that we're recording this the day before the thing, and if we bump him up again, that could like really backfire. However, I just went for Modi because I think I was convinced by Rory's argument, and also I think as a new entry to the board, I would have liked to have seen him move
got some
again.
catching up
He's got
to
some
do.
catching up to
Yeah.
do. So our choice is Putin, but Putin doesn't move again because we didn't have unanimity. But democracy says our ultimate winner of the week is Vladimir
Should you be
Putin.
factoring in where they are on the board in your decisions? Do you
Probably
know what
not.
I mean? Probably not. Just
What are you going to do about it?
Just a thought.
Okay, so moving down, your options are Anthony Albanese, Milei, Schultz, or Ramaphosa.
This is actually a tough one.
It is a
isn't
tough
it?
one.
They're all quite bad. Okay, let's start at that end, and let's start with you, Georgina.
My biggest loser is Javier Milei. Because it just sounds really embarrassing.
Yeah, it's pretty rough.
Yeah.
It's a sort of sympathy downvote. Mine is also Millet. I feel a bit stubborn picking mine both times,
Unbelievable.
but there you go. That says something about me, doesn't it?
I've also chosen Millet.
Hey.
Mainly because the other ones are sort of, they've had bad weeks, but they sort of feel like bad weeks that you'd expect within
That's
politics,
true.
whereas this is just a complete unforced and embarrassing error, I think. So
I see that. I'm sorry, I'm breaking it again.
Oh, come on.
Sorry, Schultz. He's about to lose an election, and he's
Yeah.
had
About to, I think, being the operative
true.
bit of that sentence.
But even still, his polling is continuing to decline. It's been a miserable election campaign for him, and everything is going against him. And I know that he's probably going to be like finance minister or in a coalition or something, but I'm sorry. He was chancellor for a bit, and he's not anymore. And Milei might not even be impeached. That would be the bad week for him. This is just embarrassing. It's some dude went on CoffeeZilla and did an hour interview. It's like, I don't know. But I see your point. I do see your point. Okay, Milei is the ultimate winner of the week.
loser.
Milei is the ultimate loser of the week, but doesn't move again. Okay, that is everything for this week. Make sure you let us know in the comments who you want to see moved or added to the board next week in the audience suggestion section. And join us again next week to see who that is, who wins, who loses, and if Olaf Scholz moves down again on the board or not. We'll see you then.
Thank you.